Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko te atu pātiki te monga, ko apawaho te awa no o tahi aho. He kai whakahaere I te rātanga pumanawa tangata I te whare wananga o Waitaha o. Ko Karen Mather tōku ingoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Neil. Thanks for that introduction. Yes, I've been at UC for 14 years in a variety of HR roles, and my professional and educational background is in adult learning and in strategic organisational development. Today I'd like to share some learnings from our journey, and you don't need to worry, we're not up in the strategic visioning space yet, so hopefully the reflections that I've got for you will be relevant if you're starting out in your journey. I'd like to acknowledge the senior leaders from UC who've been enabling and supporting our work as we've been going through, and also the many colleagues from across the UC campus who are really passionate and are seeing a difference in what we're doing. Thank you. Thought I was stuck as well. So a little bit of context first. We're established in 1873, so we have been around a long time, coming up for 150 years. We have 5 academic areas: colleges of arts, business and law, science, engineering, and education, health and human development. And we also have support areas such as HR, IT, student services, and a library. We have a mix of occupational groups. So everything was going along pretty nicely, and we were very comfortable in the way that we were working. Reasonably successful in the things that we do. And in 2009, 2010, Paul O'Flaherty, the Executive Director of HR, started to have some discussions around organisational culture. But I guess we were in that denial phase and no one was particularly interested in hearing anything about it. So nothing really happened at that stage. But I guess it wouldn't be from Christchurch if I didn't mention the E word within the first few minutes of our conversation. And in early 2011 we received a shake-up, both figuratively and literally, with the earthquakes that happened. So it was absolutely not the way we would have chosen to change, but we had a big imperative to make differences and to change the way that we worked. So as we worked through the immediate aftermath and the launch of our very well-practiced emergency management, to teaching in tents. We had quite a big tent village, working out of caravans, and then moving to teaching and working in prefabs. The demolition and rebuild of campus started. And there was another really cool story that arose at this time that's, I'll draw the relevance to shortly, but I'm sure you all have heard of the Student Volunteer Army, which started very informally after the earthquake in 2010 and then really rallied after the big earthquakes that we had. So they've since evolved into a well-supported organisation which has been instrumental in working with youth across the globe in disaster relief working in a lot of New Zealand schools around, all around the country, and also still performing great service in our local community. So the students really embraced this movement, and it's got a name. It's called service learning in the States. And in America, it's built into university degrees and recognised as credit. So how could we use this opportunity and this movement to give the students something a little bit different and to differentiate ourselves? I'll talk about that shortly. Another big change that was underway was many of our buildings had to be demolished or they had to be extensively remediated. And we were told that in these new buildings we were not going to have the traditional tiered enormous lecture theatres. We were going to have flat rooms. So this meant that the well-established pedagogy of lecturing in large areas was going to have to change. And people would need to harness the opportunity that employers were asking for, which was to make our graduates more employment ready, so building in more project work, teamwork, group assignments and things like that. So it was quite different methodology of teaching. And the other thing that was a big motivator for change is that this is what the earthquakes did to our student numbers. So on the left-hand side, 2009, you can see we were going along quite nicely there, and then a big dip. And this is because the big event happened on the second day of the first semester of the year. So people were able to leave with no financial penalty, and that's what they did. It was a scary time. People went home, and a lot of people didn't come back. What we did do, though, to react to the pressure to differentiate ourselves was harness that idea of service learning. One of our lecturers was from the States, and he created a paper called Christchurch 101. I think it's probably, for those of you from universities, and I know there's a few, probably one of the fastest developed and implemented papers that's ever occurred. And that gave the students the opportunity to go out into the community, hear some, talk through theory around what service means and the difference that it makes to communities, and write assignments based on their reflections of that learning. And then that exercise turned into one of our graduate attributes of community engagement. So now, all these years on now, we have a new graduate profile which encompasses community engagement, global experience, bicultural competence and confidence, and employability, as well as being the mastery in your chosen discipline. Just on the bicultural issue, once we started to promise our students a bicultural experience, then of course we had to upskill our staff in that regard. So that has been a journey for people as well. So my mihi here this morning as part of that is learning the language, being able to weave that through the academic offerings as well. So to do all of these things and realise all those opportunities, we really had to break down our silos. We had to use cross-unit collaboration, we'd need greater creativity and innovation, and we'd need to achieve a lot. We needed to ensure, so that for that to happen, that our staff were engaged, that they were supported, that they were resilient, and that they were focused on the long-term vision. So for us, now that culture conversation was able to be had. I'll just quickly show you some results. So as at December 2018, this is our preferred culture circumplex, not our current, our preferred. And if you have gone through this exercise yourself, it probably doesn't look any different to what you came out with either. I think it's pretty standard. One thing for us is that oppositional red spike. I guess in an academic institution you would expect that. We're required by law to be the critic and conscience of society, and that does permeate our culture. So for us, we need to be looking to harness that in a more constructive way. Here's the current culture as at March. And this is pretty standard. This is organisational wide, but it's pretty standard. If you drill down to teams, you definitely see the avoidance there, as well as the, what's the other one that we're, conventional, with that oppositional spike. So I'd just like to take you through some insights now. So some things we sort of anticipated and we planned for, but most of them we learnt along the way. Starting principle was about resourcing the program, how we were going to do that, and Neil and Sean both talked about, how they partner with organisations. We decided that we would get some in-house practitioners in place, and so that we could support our leaders through this program of work. I'm going to use the word program, I know, sorry Sean. I'll talk about the program in the rolling, getting the surveys out, and I'll talk about that in a minute. That's a piece of work that needs to be done. The ongoing culture conversation is, of course, not a program or a project. If I say it, you'll have to forgive me. So we wanted to start with LSIs for the leaders, and then we knew we were going to do the OCI, OEI. So what was the best way to do that? So we have a mixed model. We use human synergistics to debrief our senior leader LSIs, and we use our in-house practitioners for all the other people leaders in the organisation. And human synergistics come in after we've done a survey and run a 2-day workshop to debrief the results. Then the HR and OD team work with the managers of the various areas about what are the next steps going to be. So we have 27 accredited practitioners, and we've completed 400 LSIs since 2012. Another starting principle which has really influenced a lot of the decisions that we've made was that we decided we would allow every single staff member to participate in the survey. And I think that's reasonably unique. A lot of people use sample groups, but we knew with our population that that just wouldn't work. Everyone needed to be able to have their say and fill out the survey if they wanted to. And if you're from a university, that might ring true with you as well. So what we decided to do was survey by each senior leader portfolio on a rolling program. We started in 2015 and we've just, end of 2018-19, completed our last survey. Now, the definite pros and cons of that method. It took a long time. We haven't got sort of before and after organisational level data yet, but it was the only way that we were going to get any buy-in. So as you can see, we sent out nearly 3,000 surveys in that time. Something that we anticipated was there were going to be lots of gnarly questions. So every academic staff member is a researcher. So they know a lot about research, survey methods, norms, the methodology. They want to know about ethics and privacy, all those things. So we started a bank of frequently asked questions, and that's grown quite a lot. So we tried to anticipate it. And I have made a joke about this, but it is honestly a true story. I'd say to my colleagues, I'll ask human synergistics about that. We can't be the first people to ever ask that question. And I'll get an email back saying, you're the first people to ever ask that question. So thank you, Sean and Pam particularly, for being on the end of the phone and for having a line through to Rob Cook when it really got particularly gnarly about in-depth survey things that I couldn't answer. So here's some examples. Probably not the last one isn't really true, but that's kind of how it feels. Another insight that my colleagues from universities will probably understand, and this might sound a little bit obvious to the rest of you, but every leader needed to be ready for this. They needed to be comfortable with the change themselves and bought into it and able to lead the change. So in universities, in the academic areas, the heads of department are generally an academic staff member who's taking their turn for 3 to 5 years to lead. So they often, well, they wouldn't have a management or leadership background. They're often doing it unwillingly. And so something like this was never going to work unless we really worked with that group of people to get them ready. So one of the things that we started to do, this is a sort of a learning as we went along, is use the ADCAR framework, which is part of the ProSci change management methodology, where every individual is assessed and taken through awareness of the change and the need for change, desire to support the change, knowledge of how to support the change, and given the ability to then do it. So the idea was to have every leader at the ability stage by the time they had the survey reports in their hand. So that was how we went into these areas, to make sure that we actually cast our eye over every individual leader so that we could get the best support for the survey results and the work that was going to carry on after that. And then we also offered a professional development program for those leaders. We put them through the LSI, and then we had the, as you can see, change and coaching, and then the 2-day workshop with the results. Because we had a rolling program, we had a good 6 months, sometimes a year before we knew we were going to run the survey, so that was one of the positive things from our program of a rolling survey to be able to have that lead-in time. So our culture leadership population is around 300, and we've run 12 of those 2-day workshops. Just before I talk to what this is, this photo always gladdens my heart when I look at it, because up the front there we have Professor Angus McIntosh, Deputy Head of the School of Biological Sciences, and Catherine Reid, Head of Geological Sciences, talking to a group of about 100 about their survey results and what they've been doing in that area. So that's a good photo for me. The Director of HR was very keen that we got our leaders together on a regular basis so that they could share what they'd been doing, what the challenges were, and that they could see that some areas were making a difference. So we started a professional learning community called Blue Clues, Clues for culture, leadership, understanding and educational seminars. And we get together 4 times a year. We've done it for 2 years now, and we have topics like you can see there, leading from the green to the blue, red to the blue, problem-solving circles, and the speech that the presentation Sean just did, we've run that one as well. And they've become so popular that the staff have asked that they have a similar session. So starting next month, we'll be running for those 2,000 people, probably run 4 sessions so we can get everyone along a similar sort of thing, a sort of a back to basics. My leader's not leading this, but I'm really keen to know about it, or I'm new, or those sorts of things. People will come along to that. At the last event we had 2 weeks ago, we had 100 people of our culture leaders there. This is an insight that didn't really come along until we had some results out. We were working at the organisational level with the OCI, OEI, and we were working with individuals with the LSI. But once you start to get drilled down and you get team results, you realise that everyone's in quite a different place. So you see that organisational view, but of course that's made up by a lot of different results. So a team, working with these teams is going to be different. And a lot of our teams looked like the one at the bottom there. So a lot in that passive defensive cluster. And of course, do you think those people are going to want to talk about changing their culture? They're in that safe, secure space. They're not going to talk to their colleague about changing their interactions or what makes things difficult for them. So I didn't realise it was called intervention specificity, but I'm going to use that term now. Once you have this gold here, you can start to design your interventions. How do you go in and work with that team to move them into a more constructive space? And I remember Neil saying early on in the journey when we started, the biggest barrier to changing your culture will be your current culture, and that's exactly what these images show. So one of the things we've been doing is using the problem-solving circles that Human Synergistics promote. It's one of their tools, and what that allows us to do is to bring teams in. Our HR advisors have designed an in-house program. They bring along a real-life problem that they're working on. We work through the problem-solving circles, which very much builds a constructive way of working together. So as we're working through this problem, we're working on building a more constructive culture with that team and getting them out of that secure place. And the last insight that I have for you here is just think about what other parties might be interested in what you're doing. So for us, we have obviously in-house experts that I've already mentioned in survey methods and research, but also our psychology department, they would have a view on this. Management, HR, lecturers had a view. So we brought them in very early so that we could show them the model, show them some reports to try and get their buy-in rather than have them passively resisting behind the scenes, or aggressive defensive resistance, which is hard to deal with as well. And if you have a union, it's probably a good idea to let them know what you're doing as well, just to get rid of any suspicion that they might have about what this is. I would like to explain to you our program's name, Whiria Te Taura Tangata. we were gifted this name by the Office of the AVC Māori once they had been through their survey and started working on their results. And the metaphor is great. It's the idea of those very thin strands from the harakeke that are quite strong, but they even more gain more strength when they're twisted with one another and plaited into these really, really strong ropes. So you can still see the individuality of the strands, but the strength is engaging with the collective in a long-term vision together. That's quite a significant metaphor for us. So some examples of constructive change, because it's always good to see the practical. Just before I go in, though, I would like to go back to what Sean was saying, because, and I forgot to say this yesterday in Christchurch, leadership is so key. I've got only 3 examples here, but when I think about these 3, the leaders in those areas have really embraced this as a way to lift performance. They're not seeing it as an HR thing. They like us there supporting them, but they get it, they get the results. They've enabled their staff with time to reflect on the results themselves, figure out what they mean and come up with what they want to do. It's really so significant that the leaders do that. And the other thing that they do, they've done their LSI. They know about modelling the right behaviours. They know where perhaps if they were in that aggressive defensive cluster, what that is going to do in their leadership style. So they're trying to model every given situation, every day, the constructive behaviours, because they know they'll influence the culture of their team if they do otherwise. So the first example is from Student Services, who are working with a project team called Student First to look at the student experience. So in this particular case, international students enrol and are accepted online, but they have to come along and enrol in person, bringing all their documentation with them. And up until a couple of years ago, there were queues of around up to 6 hours to be processed, which was not very good for the students or for the staff. And students weren't well briefed, so they were poorly prepared as well. So the team knew they had to do something about this. So they used design thinking to turn the situation that they had into this situation here, where it was much, much more successful. So they used design thinking. They reached out to other areas across the university, and I don't think that would have happened before. People sort of seen enrolment as a student services matter, whereas they actually worked with other people to come up with different ways of doing this. And they also put out a big call for staff to volunteer on the day to help, and they had, as you can see, much more people there along helping. So they were very innovative. They had a pop-up international lounge in the library, for example, so they were keeping the students occupied while the processing was happening. So in terms of culture, they really had a vision of no queues. So no queues just didn't mean improve the IT, that meant what else could we do using people? And true collaboration was really working on that inter-unit collaboration, which is always often in our survey results, that inter-unit work is not seen as positive, so this would have been lifting that causal factor. Another example with some circumplexes is learning resources, which is made up of library, IT and facilities management, so quite a big service unit with different functions but a lot of commonalities as well. They did their first survey in 2015, and they did another one in 2017, and this is hot off the press for 2019. So you can see a high level of engagement, similar response rates there across the 3 surveys. When they got their first results, they had a sustained effort on leadership, so their exec team and then the 3 exec teams below in those 3 units. They also gave their team time to look through the results, and they wanted the area to come up with 2 causal factors to work on over the time frame, and so they picked empowerment and goal clarity, which were low. Now, you might look at that and think, has it changed a lot? You remember Sean talking about the quagmire of the green? when you're in that secure place and you're not wanting to put your head up, it is quite slow to make a change. So they have definitely moved the constructive behaviours on the people side of the circumplex, which I think they've done through this increased collaboration across the area. And they're still very motivated to keep going. Another thing to note, if you've done this survey, there's 31 causal factors. In 2015, they had 5 causal factors above the line, the rest were below the line. And by 2019, they've moved that from 5 to 21. So that is quite a substantial change. And an example for you, our IT division decided to start running hack fests, where they would bring together relevant groups of people to work on a real life problem and come up with a solution using a sprint agile methodology. And one outcome out of this is the UC Go app, which staff and students download onto their phone. It's a really good daily information tool. You can see maps there, how to log in to Learn, which is our Moodle learning management system, those sorts of things. It really came into its own on the 15th of March when we had to get out a whole lot of messages to our community about the event that was unfolding, about how to keep yourself safe. So it was very timely in that regard, and I don't think we would have had that app if it hadn't been for the work that they were doing on culture. And my last example for you is a small academic unit. So this is part of our College of Education, Health and Human Development. That was their first survey, 2016. You see 8 people responded. So it's all academic staff, 1 professional staff member, and that's their results 3 years later. So with a smaller team, I guess you've got the potential to make significant change quickly, but for those of you that work with academics, it's quite hard. Because they are very individualistic. And how do they see themselves as a team? That's probably, would that be true? Would that be my university colleagues? An academic department exists for administration purposes. They don't really work together. It's quite hard to explain, but yeah, that's what it's like. So how did they do that? So I talked to Annalise, who's the, oh, actually, I need to show you something else first. This is what their causal factors look like for the first survey, and that's what they look like 3 years later. So what did they do? They've written a book. So the book they'd started to talk about the book before they did their culture journey, but the head of department said to me, what a fabulous vehicle for collaboration, learning about the work of others, so finding what's the common theme through that book. They had to work together to do that. They met some publication targets, so that was achievement focused, and they've built a lot of I can't even say the word, someone help me. Thank you, collegiality, that's what I'm trying to say, thank you. So they're going to write another one, they've got another one scheduled for 2021. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can email me or find me on LinkedIn or have a chat at morning tea. Thank you.